Hi, hello, my name's Hal, and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to do the mid-year freakout tag. I like doing a little wrap-up of all of the books that I read halfway through the year, with the idea of then doing the other half of the year at the end of the year. This was my plan for last year, and then famously I say, my external hard drive did explode on me in the beginning of January, which really took the wind out of my sails of making any other wrap-up content at the beginning of the year. So we're attempting it again this year. So this is part one. So this is all the books that I've read in the first half of the year. I ended up reading, I believe, 47 books in the first half of the year, technically. So I have read more than this, but they're books that I've not tracked because they were rereads or they were just books that I wanted to read in my own time and not talk about publicly. So that's kind of the ballpark that we have going in. Also, did want to mention, I have had a haircut since the last time you guys have seen me. It was just really long, and with having a heat wave in the UK, it was really annoying and frustrating me, and also I'd been thinking about cutting my hair back to this length anyway, so that's happened. The first question is, what's the best book that I've read so far in 2026? For this I have I was going back through my list. I think I have two that I would like to talk about. The first one is The Everlasting by Alix E. Harrow. This is a historical fantasy book. We're following our main character Owen, who is a historian, and a story that he has been obsessed with since he was a child has been the story of Una Everlasting, who is this female knight that's kind of very integral to the story of how the country he grew up in, Dominion, was formed. And so as he is kind of, studying, kind of trying to get materials to do a translation of the story of Una Everlasting for his academic work, I don't know if it was his PhD or something, he instead gets given this book which has this absolutely new to him story, and by reading it he gets transported back in time and meets Una as she's kind of going into her last great battle. And things kind of devolve from there. We're faced with kind of time loops and how things change due to how history is written. We're thinking a lot about fascism and the control of history and things like that. And I thought that as so yeah, we're back in time in a medievally knight situation, which was really fun. I really resonated with a lot of this and really kind of took bits of it and related it back to my experience of growing up in the UK and Arthurian legends and things like that. So I thought that it really worked on those levels. I thought that the romance really worked. I really enjoyed the fact that we were playing with gender with these characters. So Una is, the more has more masculine traits. She's big, she's strong, she's powerful, she's scarred and things like that, whereas Owen is this softer, more feminine character. He is, an academic. He's a coward. He's run away from war before. And I thought that was really fun, and it really made the romance interesting for me. One of my other favourite books for this year was In Memoriam by Winn. This is a historical novel set in World War I, where we're following our two main characters, Henry Gaunt and Sidney Elwood, as they're young boys going to a boarding school who then end up going to war during World War I, and it explores kind of the friendship and relationship that they have. So a lot of yearning between these two characters. They have spent a lot of their time in boarding school being really close friends, but never quite kind of realizing that they're both interested in each other in this way. And then one of them ends up going to the war first and the other one kind of follows. There are letters in this. There are excerpts from the newspaper that the school run. And yeah, I'm sure I've mentioned this before, I find World War One really interesting, and also I really love like gay yearning stories. So like this absolutely checked all of my boxes, and I thought it was so well done, and I'm, still something that I think about many months later. The next question is the best sequel that you've read so far, and in this I'm going to talk about a book series that I've not mentioned in my favourites of the year, but is very much in my favourites, and that is the Kushiel's Dart series, and I have the second book in the series, Kushiel's Chosen. I do think that, to be fair, my favourites are the first and the third book in this series. I didn't enjoy Kushiel's Chosen as much as those two, but really, really loved this series. I think I rated all of them 5 stars, which is kind of crazy. So in this is a historical, like fantasy romance series. We are following our main character, Phaedra, she is brought up as a courtesan and a spy, and she is very good at her job because she's also this thing called an Inquisette. She is chosen by one of the like angel figures in this world called Kushiel, which means that she is God's perfect little masochist. And so we kind of follow her story as she gets involved with the political things that are going on in her like home country. She ends up forming this relationship with our male main character in this story called Jacqueline, who is a like warrior monk who had been sworn to a life of like celibacy and protection. And yeah, they're just really good. I love the writing style in this. It's very like old fantasy in a real way. Phaedra has this red dot in her eye, and every time it's described, it's like a scarlet mote. So like that's the level of like old fantasy like writing style that we have going on. And they're pretty long, and I just felt so connected to all of the characters in this story. And I feel like the sequels did a really good job of, we get this relationship between Phaedra and Jacqueline, and it's, kind of settled in book 1. And then we get like tension within that relationship again in like book 2 and book 3. And I think the author does a really good job of writing realistic tension between these two characters, knowing that they like really love and respect each other without making it seem trite and forced. So for example, the tension in this book is something that I had picked up on at the end of book 1, So the main tension that's going on in this one is that Phaedra is a courtesan and she sleeps with a lot of different people, and Jacqueline is, and like that's her job and she enjoys doing it, and Jacqueline is this warrior monk that has been sworn to celibacy, and that like pops up against each other because she decides to go back to court and like re-pick up doing her job and stuff like that, and Jacqueline like is struggling with that idea, which again like I think is realistic for where we left these characters off in book 1, and they spent a lot of this book like being really mean to each other, but also like that they care about each other at the end of the day, and I think it was just handled really well. And I would say the same thing about Kushiel's Avatar, and we're also kind of exploring more of the world and things like that. So yeah, really, really enjoyed this series. The next question is new release that you haven't read but want to. I do have a couple here, so I'm gonna talk about this in my my wrap-up for July, but what I've realised recently is I have kind of read every single Veronica Roth book, and I like them to kind of more or less extent, but obviously she has a new book out, the Traitor's Son, and I'm pretty interested in picking that up. It's going to be from a library or something, but again, I'm interested to see kind of what's going on there, especially because I've loved some of her short stories. I'm really interested to see how she's writing a longer novel. And then in a similar vein, I guess, another thing that I would probably want to pick up from the library, I am interested in picking up Inammorata by Reid. I've read, I think, Just a Study in Drowning by Reid, and I did enjoy it. I am interested in reading a more gothic fantasy book. I do think there's things that are there that sound interesting. And also, it was blurbed by Jacqueline Carey of Kushiel's Dart series. So again, that makes me really interesting. I do think that blurb has been taken out of context in a way that's pretty funny. Like, if you know anything about Ava Reid and her, like, you know, they're like, I'm never putting trigger warnings on my book, like, opinions, I felt like the discourse was very funny. But yeah, like, I do think it's working for me because I've read, I think specifically because I have read Kushiel's Dart and I know how dark those books can get. I'm like, I'm prepared. Do have a recommendation that I'm really excited to pick up, which is The Works of Vermin by Hiron and Ennes. This was recommended to me by someone who was previously recommending The Mars House by Natasha Pulley, which is like one of my favorite books of all time and like made me obsessed with Natasha Pulley. So I'm very excited to pick it up on like that ground alone. I had no idea about anything else. I know it's fantasy and kind of, I guess, a little bit of horror, and there's a big centipede, because that's on the cover, and that's it. The next question is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I do have a couple. There's obviously things that I'm excited for that I have pre-ordered, which I talked about in my like mid-year like book haul / pre-orders that I'm looking forward to. So on that list is obviously like The Salt King by Natasha Pulley. I'm obsessed with everything this woman writes. You know, it's apocalyptic, salt mine, gay, there's a Jesuit priest. It's something that I'm interested in. The final Adventure Zone graphic novel adaptation is also coming out in the second half of the year, which I'm very excited when my pre-order comes through. And then a book that I am very excited to come out, but I won't be picking up as a pre-order at the moment, is Bodies of Magic by Freya Marske. I have read, I think, all of Freya Marks's previous books, and I've enjoyed them to kind of more or less extent. And I am very interested about this book. You know, it's one of those things where I've read the summary and I thought it sounded interesting, and I've now forgotten every single thing that I've read. But I do think it's a fantasy book, and there's like some kind of like, they're medical students or something, and there's a murder, and they have a trial that they have to do to like graduate their course, and then one of the students is murdered and they have to like investigate this. And I believe there's like a queer romance in it as well. Very, very interesting. I just tend to buy paperbacks of the Freya Marske books that I like, so I will be trying to get it from a library. The next book is Biggest Disappointment. I was thinking about this and I was like, do I have a biggest disappointment? I have to admit, I am now less mad about the invocations. I have to admit, some time has passed. I've chilled myself out on that one, so we're not talking about that one today. But I do think a book that would fit in this prompt would be Holy Wrath by Veronica Mier. This was like fine. This is a lesbian kind of fantasy romance. We're following our main character Freya, who is a healer in this like walled city. She's been raised within this kind of religion. She lives in a very like patriarchal and misogynistic society, and then, you know, she is tasked with looking after a prisoner who is quite injured that they have captured, who is this like knight for like the enemy called the Lupinox, and then she has like an actual human name, who's kind of like a fallen angel type figure. And then as they spend time with each other, we kind of start to unravel kind of what's going on with the religion and things like that, and then they kind of, you know, band together to defeat kind of the evil, etc., etc. It had some really interesting ideas. I do enjoy a book that is about religion, especially like with this one. It was very heavily based on Catholicism, and as much as I am a practicing Catholic, I do enjoy conversations around religion and the issues that are kind of present in a lot of organized religions. I thought that some of the language was like really interesting, and I thought that there were really interesting kind of like descriptors that were used. It just like, I lost interest in it so quickly, and then I was just like listening to this book. I didn't really like the narrator, which I don't think helped. Yeah, I just like didn't have any emotional tie-in to this book, and I think that's why it would count as a disappointment, because I was interested and I thought the ideas were cool. It just like did not, there was no payoff for me as I was reading this book. The next question is the biggest surprise. So I do have like I guess, two in here to more or less extent. So one of them is Looking for Group by Alexis Hall. I can't even tell you exactly why I picked this up. I have known about Alexis Hall kind of here and there, and so when I saw that like my library had Looking for Group, it might have been like on a shelf. I ended up picking up because it sounded interesting. This is a contemporary like gay romance, but both of the characters play a MMORPG. So one of our characters, Drew, ends up leaving the like raiding guild that he'd previously been a part of and joining a new raiding guild, and in doing so he then meets he meets all the other people in this new like guild, but in specifically he meets Kit, who he starts to like form this online kind of relationship and kind of flirtation with, and then realizes that Kit is in fact a boy who is also in the same like British city that he's in. And so kind of we go from there. I really, really enjoyed this, and I think it was because you can tell that Alexis Hall really cares about MMORPGs, and I believe this is kind of, you know, very much based off of like World of Warcraft, which it sounds like Alexis Hall spent a lot of time playing, and it was so baked into not only the like physical text of the book, but also this book had a bunch of like footnotes and author's notes where he was explaining a little bit further about how this game worked, or like, you know, where this was pulled from like similar kind of MMORPGs, and I felt like that made it really, really like interesting. I also found that the writing style was really funny and kind of like witty, and it was very British in this real way. It's very British, like 2010s, like they go for a date at Pizza Express. And like it was just really, really fun, and I picked it up after like slogging my way through some bugs, and I just like had such a good time, and I was so surprised by how much I really, really loved this book. This was like less of a surprise because I really loved some of this author's books before, but I really, really enjoyed Running Close to the Wind, and I had been a bit trepidatious of this book before because I really, really loved A Taste of Golden Iron, and this is set in the same world, and in A Taste of Golden Iron it's a very like, I guess, straightforward fantasy romance. We're following the younger brother of the Sultan, and he kind of gets himself in a situation. He gets assigned a new like main guard, and they have to investigate some like things that have been going on, and also they fall in love. So what I kind of knew about Running Close to the Wind is that it was pirates. I wasn't actually aware that this had a romantic plotline into this at the beginning, and I knew that they had stolen something from the Empire that is referenced in A Taste of Golden Iron, and because of like how much I loved A Taste of Golden Iron, I was like, I don't want like my idea of this world to be tainted. But in the end, I had like such a fun time. I like really enjoyed these characters. It's very funny, it's very like hijinks, fast-paced, and yeah, it's just really good. And like, to be fair, you do need to criticize Empire is the moral of this story at the end of the day. I know it's like fantasy and not real, but like I do think it's actually interesting that this author has gone back and been like, I'm gonna make some points. The next question is new kind of favourite author, either a debut or someone who's new to you. I have two in this category, which I think would make sense based on some of the books that I previously talked about, and that is Jacqueline Carey, on account of really, really loving the Kushiel's Dart series. I rated all those 5 stars. I'm absolutely interested in, you know, reading more from her if any of that comes across my path. And then as well, Alexis Hall. Based on how much I genuinely really enjoyed Looking for Group, I'm definitely interested in picking up some more of his books as well. The next question is newest fictional crush. I tend to, like, at least last time when I did this, I did not have an answer to this, but I do this time, I do. Because I'm not really a self-inserty person. I do really enjoy romance, but I enjoy it as, like, the two characters. I'm metaphorically in the cuck chair. But I read Reclaimed by Seth Haddon earlier this year, and again, whilst I appreciate that as a romance between those two characters, Luan Zek is so hot. he is this big bear who is the ambassador for, like, you know, a different country. I think it's because of how he's described as a bear and how he's made attractive as a bear. And he's just so hot. And that's all I have to say on that matter. But, like, in a real way, it's like, yeah. Yeah, no, I get it. The next question is newest favourite character. So, again, I was reading through these questions and I'm like, what am I going to say? And I do have an answer for this, and it was immediate. And it's Troy Barrett from, like, the Game Changers universe, but more specifically Role Model. I had my ups and downs with this series. I overall kind of did really enjoy it. But I was going into, like, the last, like, couple of books, so, like, Role Model and Common Goal, being like, okay, I'm kind of more excited about these. And I was really excited for Role Model because I thought I would really enjoy it, because from what I knew about Troy Barrett was that he was a pathetic wet cat of a man and he was trying to be better. And I was like, that sounds like a character who's up my alley. And guess what? He was up my alley. So yeah, like, the way that I'm rotating this man in my head as someone who is not, like, actively seeking out fanfic which features Troy Barrett is to an embarrassing level, I've gotta say. I just love a sad, pathetic man who is, like, trying to do better and get himself out of the hole that he's dug himself into. Like, I cannot explain myself any more than that. He's just in there, in a real way. Like, obviously Shane and Ilya are also in my brain in a real way. But, like, firstly, I didn't read those books this year. Secondly, we've got to shout out the third man that's taking up rent space in my brain, which is, in fact, Troy Barrett. The next question was books that made you cry. This is going to sound a little bit repetitive, but I have to shout out to the, Kushiel's Dart series, but I think most specifically Kushiel's Dart. The way that I spent from about 50% of this book to the end of this book, which I was reading as a digital, like, paperback version of the UK version, which is like 1,000 pages, crying my eyes out at various points in this story really should be studied. It was not like continuous, but it was repeated. It was several times at various points in this story from about the 50% mark. So I think that is in the first place. The other book that I wanted to mention as part of this was, as well, Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell. This is a gay, like, sci-fi, gay romance sci-fi book. A sci-fi gay romance book, if you will. Which is a, like, it's not an arranged marriage, but it is a, like, forced bond in a very, like, Sentinel Guide way between the son of, like, an ambassador or general and an up-and-coming, like, captain. And yeah, it just, like, it gets quite deep in some places. It's very much about, like, well, firstly, there's great body horror of, like, being fused to another person, but it's also, like, about knowing a person so well that you can, like, build them, like, atom by atom. And, like, that was just done in such a beautiful way that made me cry, you know? The next question was a book that made you happy, and I once again have to kind of go back to some of my previous answers and mention, obviously, Running Close to the Wind. I read this whilst I was on holiday and I just had such a fun time. It's genuinely just a really funny book and I thought all the characters were really fun there. The next question is most beautiful book that you bought so far this year. Once again, I am kind of relying on some of my answers for previous ones, but I do really love the US cover of In Memoriam, so much so that I went out of my way to get a copy of this. I just think that it's very simple, but I think it works really well and it's really cool. So it looks like this in the front. You've got some more of the painting continuing onto the spine and then the back as well. In a similar vein, I also really love the US covers for the Kushiel's Dart series. I love that they are more of that painted, like, person on a cover fantasy book compared to the UK covers. I think this one is my favourite, but also I love black and red, so that might be part of it. I guess technically I could also talk about this. This isn't really a book, it's a fancy zine anthology, but I did get my copy of Very Sincerely Yours, which is the Holmes and Watson anthology, which I backed on Kickstarter earlier this year or last year, and it's just like absolutely gorgeous. It's a mix of like stories, and they often have associated art with just just straight up art pieces, and it's gorgeous. I'm very slowly making my way through this because it makes me incredibly emotional. And then the last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I obviously have books on my physical TBR that I either bought this year that I need to read, or previous years that I need to read. I still have the Spirit Walker trilogy by Kate Elliott that I'm planning to read at some point. And obviously, whilst I tend to just kind of restrict this video to the first 6 months, I do also want to mention that I recently picked up 2 books just based on like the premise, and like I read a sample, and I really like them, which I'm planning to read quite soon. So that is Trick Shot by L.A. Jasper, which is a gay hockey romance, and Aurethia Rising by Atlas Laika, which is a political, like, sci-fi arranged marriage situation. So, just because I'm hoping to read those soon, I thought it would be fun to mention it. But yeah, other than that, it's the things that I have on my, like, that I physically have that I need to read. It's, you know, my Libby holds, it's books that I have pre-ordered for the rest of the year, etc, etc. The kind of usual situation. So yeah, I hope that was interesting, at least. I feel like I spoke a lot about, like, the same 3 books, but I think, you know, when I was looking back through my books, those were the ones that I cared about and had emotions about and wanted to talk about, so that's what you've gotten. I hope that your reading has been good for the first half of the year. If you would like to, you know, tell me what your favourite book was this year, I would love to know. But yeah, I think that's everything. Bye!